Hello, I'm Jo Brickman, and I'm Deputy Director and Director of Impact Strategy at VertueLab. At VertueLab, we are tackling the climate crisis and creating shared economic prosperity by providing catalytic investments and providing holistic entrepreneurial support to climate and technology innovators. I'm here today to give you a primer on how we go about assessing the potential for a climate tech startup to reduce greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Our hope is that you'll feel better prepared to estimate your climate impact. So our Climate Impact Fund at VertueLab has three key criteria for its investments: climate impact potential, commercial potential, and additionality. Most likely, if you're watching this tutorial, it's because of the requirement to demonstrate climate impact potential. But I would encourage you to take a step back a moment to reflect on the broader value it can have for your company. If your company, like VertueLab, has a mission to make an impact with your work, measuring that will be a critical part of ensuring that you're achieving that objective. And getting that feedback is a key part of informing your strategy and growth. As a nonprofit investor, VertueLab seeks to have impact. We plan for and measure for that impact to ensure that we have the information that we need to guide our decision-making, to support our companies in their success and in their impact, and ultimately to ensure that those who have supported our work can see that the impact that they have had through us. For today, this video is intended to help you get started with developing your emissions reduction potential. If you find that you need help getting to the next step, I and my colleague, Tricia Clemens, would be happy to meet with you and be your thought partners as you go about the work. I'm going to start with the topic of the scope for your impact assessment. There are a number of ways that companies approach this, and we want to be clear about what our expectation is. Our scope 1 impacts are the kinds of things that you could probably establish by monitoring your utility bills or having sensors on site at your production facility. These are the resources that you consume directly, the things that you emit directly in the course of doing your work. Scope 2 impacts are largely dependent on the energy mix of your particular location. And this can inform where you site your manufacturing. For example, you don't have influence over this number except by where you choose to locate yourself. And this means that we have a distinct advantage here in the Pacific Northwest with the large amount of renewable hydro we have. Scope 3 impacts take into account what happens before and after your direct processes. And this is what VertueLab and most other climate tech investors are interested in understanding, in particular, impact of the products that you sell, the impact that they have over the lifetime of their usefulness. And just remember that it's best to start planning for impact early on, since the decisions that you make during the design of your technology, the sourcing of your materials, the locating of your facility, and in building your culture all ultimately make an impact here. How you scope your analysis will define how you measure your other impacts aside from greenhouse gas emissions reduction, as well all of these other fundamentals, such as connecting your impact metrics to your core value proposition and your mission, utilizing metrics that others will recognize because they're standard, having a clear and consistent unit for measuring your impact, reference third-party data to support your claims, and tie your measurements to things that you're already keeping track of so that it's not a separate and additional trust built into your business processes. There are 5 key questions that we recommend that you start your process of measuring your impact with. And this is where we start every one of our impact measurement and management sessions with companies. I'll walk through each of these 5 step by step. Establishing your baseline. Establishing your baseline for comparison is the ideal place to start. It's hard to get started anywhere else. Your technology or service is going to need to emit less or sequester more than the business as usual in order to create a climate benefit. And figuring out that baseline for comparison is not always obvious. And so you can go to these questions to prompt your thinking At this stage also is where we look for evidence of how many greenhouse gases that baseline technology or approach emits or sequesters, along with any of the other impacts that you're interested in looking at. Ultimately, we're looking at what is the business as usual. Next, we ask for what the functional unit is that you will use to compare your product to the baseline. So that you aren't comparing apples to oranges, you need to identify a common unit. This could be straightforward if you're offering a direct replacement, such as this first example on the left, where one ingredient is sold to replace another one that serves in the exact same function. But it could be complicated if what you're offering approaches the problem that you're solving in a different way than the business as usual does, such as with electric vehicle charging, replacing gallons of gasoline. In that instance, you'd want to compare miles per gallon equivalent. Often the unit for comparison is not the unit that you sell, such as a sensor that informs building controls, but the function that unit offers, such as the energy consumed per square foot of buildings with or without the system in place. Once you know what it is that you're comparing against and the unit you're using to make the comparison, then you're looking to establish the change that your innovation makes for the better. And this improvement can be expressed in relative terms, percent reduction from baseline, for example, or in absolute terms, such as the number of gallons, tons, or kilowatt hours less, for example. This is the step in the process that's most specific to your company and technology, and where you'll be most responsible for demonstrating that this improvement exists and to what degree. Ultimately, your technology will only have impact to the extent to which it's adopted. So establishing your market capture will play a key role in evaluating potential. You're likely familiar with TAM, SAM, SOM as a language for describing how your company's market relates to the global market. Similarly, you can think of total available impact, serviceable available impact, and serviceable obtainable impact. Your specific obtainable market will be what we're looking to see reflected in your specific obtainable impact. Another aspect of adoption is the rate at which your adoption takes place. The resulting adoption curve will describe the total impact you can expect to achieve over time. There are different ways you can go about identifying this: building up based on projected sales data, or calculating backward based on your projected market capture. Ideally, you would have evidence to demonstrate. Hang on a second here. So you want to look at, how much will be deployed, the size and demand, and then how that changes over time. Being able to show, if there are market forces that are shifting during that period of time. And evidence is really key. I've mentioned it a couple times already. Ideally, you would have evidence to demonstrate how much better your technology performs based on the technology validation work that you've done. Equally important is third-party evidence for the impacts associated with your baseline. And if you can't find good third-party data, you're going to need to at least provide some justification, a narrative justification for the assumptions that you've used in your calculations that you provide us. The remainder of this presentation is really going to be focused on the tools that are available to you in your effort to establish your greenhouse gas emissions reduction potential, or ERP. Emissions reduction potential, or ERP, is really a simple function of the quantity of emissions reduced or sequestered by your product and the amount of your product that you expect to sell. ERP is increasingly the metric of choice for early stage climate tech investors like VertueLab and our peers. And there are some differences in how we approach the ERP. At VertueLab, we look at your technology's cumulative impact between today and the year 2050. Clean Energy Venture Group also uses this approach. Some others look only at the impact within a single year, the year 2050. So looking at maximum adoption. potentially. And then some others are looking at the impact that assumes the entire market adopts the technology. So the time scale and the adoption scale are both really, really key to determining what the number is that you're going to present to us. Back again to this TAM, SAM, SOM comparison here. Some are looking at the impact, assuming the entire market adopts the technology, reflecting that total available impact, which is the impact possible if deployed by the entire market. At VertueLab, what we're asking for you to do is to identify what you believe your company can capture, which is better expressed as the SOI. For those of you who are the specific obtainable impact. For those of you who are visual learners, this chart here illustrates the difference that these approaches make using a hypothetical case of an electric car company. Adoption shows up on the vertical axis with number of cars sold. Time shows up on the horizontal axis, showing the number of cars sold in a given year between today and 2050. The cumulative total available impact at the top there in gray shows the greenhouse gas emissions reduction that would be achieved if the technology were adopted by the entire automotive market between today and the year 2050. In the middle in blue, the cumulative addressable market shows the greenhouse gas emissions reduction that would be achieved if the cars were adopted by the entire market segment that this company is relevant to between today and the year 2050. In orange, this is what VertueLab is looking for, the cumulative obtainable market. The SOI, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction that would be achieved if this company met its sales targets to its specific target customers between today and the year 2050. And this should correlate with the same logic that the company uses in its financial forecasts. By comparison, some investors are looking for this figure, the total annual total available impact in the year 2050, if the technology solution were applied to the entire market. The same prep work, answering those 5 key questions that you use to develop your ERP for the Climate Impact Fund, will help you in preparing that figure as well, that annual figure. So don't worry that you're going to be using 2 entirely different procedures to get to those numbers. Now, I'm going to walk you through a few of the tools available to you to complete your ERP. The links to each one of these tools, or both of the tools that have links, are clickable in the PDF version of the slides that you can download from our website. So that'll be available to you. The first tool is Crane. This is a no-cost tool. It was developed with funding from NYSERDA in a partnership between the Clean Energy Trust, Prime Coalition, and Row AI. It's one you just have to develop a login, but there's no cost to you. And once you go to and log into Crane, you're going to come to the home page, which looks like this. You'll have 2 options for how to find your technology: the search bar, where you enter the most likely keyword, and then also the option to scan through industry categories. In this case, I'm trying to find building insulation. So I type insulation in the search bar and a drop-down list of available data shows up. Seeing that building insulation's there, I can click on that. Or I can navigate through the building industry categories by selecting buildings, which will show a list like the one to the right of all the solutions that they have data available for. You can utilize the filters to the left, one of which happens to be insulation materials. And you have the option to select only those solutions or technology types that have data that have been verified by the Crane software developers. An update to the software last year made it possible for people to upload custom data to share with others in an open source model. The software was originally launched with just 229 technologies modeled, but more have been added over time and continue to be added. So our recommendation is to start with Crane. Start here because the data is really strong, and first you're going to check to see if they have verified data for your technology solution. If so, great, you can start there. If not, don't worry, it's still actually useful to you. There are still ways to use Crane to support your process. The tool is so rich with data, you can often mine the tool for sources of information about your market that you can use by simply searching another technology that addresses the same market that you're approaching. In the next step, the tool is going to ask you to supply some information that are specific to your technology solution, your assumptions about adoption and improvement, both of which we've covered. As you play around with the tool, you'll find ways to modify the default adoption settings to get as realistic an estimate as possible. And just, user note, as you go, just make sure that you make notes about the assumptions that you use so that you don't wind up with an end result and no recollection of how you got there. And then last, if you find yourself in way over your head with customizing the model, there's an option within Crane to pay for custom assistance from the software developer. The next tool I'm going to talk about is SERC, or Simple Emissions Reduction Calculator, created by our good friends at Clean Energy Ventures in Boston. Clean Energy Ventures have a very similar way of modeling and evaluating ERP to VertueLab's. Probably the most similar of the peer organizations we've spoken with about our approach. Their tool asks for just two kinds of inputs, but as you can see, you'll have to have done your homework in order to respond to those questions. So there's work before you enter into SERC. The great news is that they have a really helpful frequently asked questions page that walks you through the process. And I think it's actually educational, even if you aren't going to use SERC, to go there, because they've got some good information about terminology and sources. As a potential applicant to VertueLab's Climate Impact Fund or any climate tech startup from the Pacific Northwest, you're always welcome to reach out to me directly to receive support in developing your ERP. My colleague, Tricia Clemens, and I serve as VertueLab's impact measurement and management team. And between the two of us, we've met with dozens of companies from our fund pipeline and our Cascadia Clean Tech Accelerator program to be a thought partner to them as they go about estimating their climate impact. If you tackle the 5 key questions I outlined in the video, you're going to be in good shape coming into your first meeting with us. Last, I need to mention life cycle assessment, or LCA. This approach to identifying the impacts associated with the production, useful life, and disposal of your product is often not quite appropriate for the stage of development that the companies we work with are in. We find ourselves most often leveraging LCAs in our work through the use of published life cycle assessments of baseline technologies. They're a great form of third-party validation of the business as usual technology that you're replacing. Getting an LCA, a full LCA of your product is really expensive and requires details about your production processes that you may either not have or have not entirely solidified yet. The only instances where we at VertueLab recommend paying for an LCA are when you're well past technology development and your production processes are well known, or where your pathway to making an impact is complicated and involve a number of different equally important contributions to greenhouse gas emissions reduction. Otherwise, it's a level of detail that's just beyond what's needed for our purposes at VertueLab. And it's a more valuable use of your time and energy to invest in getting validation of your claims of what your improvement actually is. Ultimately, whether you're applying to the Climate Impact Fund or not, I believe going through the process of defining your impact will be worthwhile for your company. At times going through this process, you identify new opportunities for innovation. We've seen that happen. Also, having a handle on this really can help you stand behind your value proposition with more confidence. And we have heard again and again from companies how being able to communicate this confidently pays off not only with investors, but with prospective employees and customers as well. I hope that this introduction helps you feel like you have a handle on the next steps for defining your impact. I said it before, but please do reach out if you'd like assistance from our team. Best of luck to you.